And we're live. All right. Always the same clicks. I think the experiment from yesterday worked really well. I've started recording these streams to disk so I can make some shorts out of them. I scheduled this stream 5 minutes ago, so kind of expecting people to trickle in slowly today. Let's go with bin 2D mesh. This should be running. This has our 2D mesh stuff is working. I would like to test out doing some maybe Blender to 2D mesh like level work. I think that could be cool. Well, let's get rid of this log in here. There's a extra info. No, it's a warn. And post process, because we were looking at GPU image. So that's all good. I didn't refactor this yet. So we're still looking at the like other implementation. But it's working pretty well. I think that this harsh line on the edge is due to sampling. But I feel like I'm not entirely sure because it fits inside of the other texture. So there is some like of the shadow black on the outside, but there's also a line here. And I don't know if that's due to the sampling that we're doing in the post process or due to something else. We are multiplying by 1 minus the sample. It might be better to do something like stew. Right, so this fills that whole area. So I think it's just because of the multiplication. Because there's no issue here. So it's definitely due to the multiplication. Maybe we can do, I don't really want a smooth step per se. We do a step. What's the syntax for step? Returns 1 if edge is less than or equal to 0 and 0 otherwise. So I think we only have 1. I don't know that this will do much for us, but I am curious. Right, if we do 0.5, let's see, sample. We're kind of vec4ing this sample, aren't we? Then step, sample, vec4. And then this will have to be vec4'd again if we're going to use it like that. Rust stream every day. Yeah, I don't know. I'm feeling it right now. It's been going well. I think that let's just keep it going, I guess. So I think using step here is going to be probably what we want. Let's remove this whole thing because we're only using 1, right? So let threshold equals this. This then doesn't have to be a vec4 because we're only doing the one, and then this is going to be vec4 of threshold. That still has a little bit of the edge there. Not as much. Especially on the edges. We could switch to a texture load or something like that to get the exact pixel. I feel like we should overall. That means I need to remember how to get the relevant information, right? Because it's not position. Right, because this would be like this, but this isn't really what we're looking for. Expected 3, found 2. Why are we expecting 3 here? And take a look at texture load. Maybe I'm not using texture load correctly. Texture load coordinates level. Image coordinate, yeah. So the level is over here. Image coordinate type of 5 does not match D2 in position XY. What is this? Let's go find it. I just found this like yesterday for somebody else. So we're going to look for vertex output. And we're really looking for the definition of it. So I'm going to search for struct vertex output. And that's going to bring us to hopefully the 2D Bevy sprite render definition. So this is actually a vec4. Do we get... I'm a little bit less familiar with the 2D pipeline than I am the 3D pipeline. Hey, Dahaka, how's it going? I'm doing all right. I ordered energy drinks and they sent me sparkling water instead. So I'm drinking sparkling water instead of being awake. But otherwise things are going well. So we get the view bindings here. This comes from Bevy render view. So we go back to creates, we go to render, source, view. So this is all clip from world, view from world, that kind of stuff. World position, MIP bias frame count. Why code manually when you can vibe code? Because vibe coding doesn't work. Is the short answer. The other answer is that the hard part of programming is not writing the code. The hard part of programming is debugging code. And if you are vibe coding stuff, if you're like letting AI generate stuff for you, you are doing the hard part without building up the understanding of what it's actually supposed to be doing, or why it's built that way, which makes debugging even harder. So yeah, that's my real answer is that it both just like doesn't work in general. You get errors that are hard to figure out. And also if you're going to write code, right? If your goal is to have something that you can then fix when it goes wrong in production or whatever, Taking somebody else's code and deploying it to production without checking it is like not a great way to build up the base that you would need to be able to debug it. Aren't I using Mac? I am using Mac. This is definitely a Mac. We get frame count in here. That's cool. I didn't know we got frame count in here. I wonder when that got added. When did frame count get added? 8 months ago. Okay. So that was 0.16 we got frame count. Oh, you understand that's quite reasonable. Yeah. Yeah. I have much stronger stances on it in general, but like if you're just gonna like want a TLDR, that's the TLDR. Globals view, position, world normal, UV, world tangent. I don't think we get information about how big this texture is that we've passed in. It does happen to be the same size as the entire view, but I don't think we get... Oh, here's our viewport. X origin, Y origin with height. So we do get it. Viewport. View.viewport is what we're looking for there. Because this image that we've passed into sample, or actually load in this case, is going to be the same size as the viewport. We've designed it that way, so we don't need to pass in any extra data or whatnot. So view.viewport. X origin, Y origin. What are X origin and Y origin? We really need the width and the height. So we're going to use, this is going to be X, Y, Z, W, and Z is going to be width and W is going to be height. Viewport dot W. Could also use like RGBA, but these aren't. This is just like random data shoved in here. So X origin, Y origin is interesting. I feel like that's a case of if we were using like sub viewports, like sub squares of the actual full camera or full output, then this would be relevant data for us. I don't think it's relevant data for us right now. We could go look at how this data is like packed. Like this code does exist, right? Like how this viewport gets created and what data that is does actually exist. It might even be as easy as just going to the camera and being like, oh, is it just this? But I don't know. We would have to probably look at the code. Morning, Cameron. How are you? So we have a number from 0 to 1 for each of these. I think that we should be able to get the pixel coordinate by doing in.uv .x. I want to keep these as width and height, I think. This is going to be part of a demo, so I think that people aren't going to really know. Let's do vec2 in.uv.x or in.uv times vec2 with height will do. And then we don't need to like construct this vec2. We just get the coordinate. We don't have view in scope. We do need to pull it in. It is from the bindings that we were just looking at. So we want mesh view bindings, which is going to be Bevy sprite mesh 2D view bindings. I think anyway, we actually set up this as a post process. So I actually can't remember if we inserted this information here or not. Right, yada, yada, yada. Dimensions. Hey, Anders, how are you? So we end up with in dot position is not what we want here. We want coord. And our coordinate dimension is not matching for some reason. So let's figure out why that is. Image coordinate of type 14 does not match dimension D2. That feels weird because we have a vec2 here. The texture load is probably going to have to be a vec3 then? No, it's supposed to be a vec2. Right, so we're in the spec here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Collapse sidebar. So we're looking at the texture load function, which reads a single texture without sampling or filtering, which is kind of what I'm looking for. Because I have a hunch that the line that we're seeing is because of this, because we were sampling instead of just loading. So we've got a texture load with the texture 2D that we're going to use, with the coordinates that we're going to use, with the at the level of the texture. So this is single dimensional, or it's a 2D texture that doesn't have multiple layers. So C is I32 or U32. That raises a question for me about, because this is like a float, right? So can we, this is not going to be vec2f. I think it can be vec2u. Oh, bindings conflict with other resource. What did I do there? Screen texture. So we don't get the view because the view would be in the same spot. So we need to pass in the view ourselves, or we need to handle this ourselves. Great, toying with skiing, nice. If you run into any issues, let me know, or any features or whatever. I was working on a couple skiing things recently. I merged Blender 5 support. I haven't released it yet. And then what was the other skiing thing I did? Where's skiing? Here's skiing. There's a couple of PRs open. I don't know about the safe list or the offline manifest situation. Needs a little bit more thought. Multi-selection component insertion. So like if you have a Blender scene and you select a bunch of objects, you can run an operator to insert the components onto those objects. What was the other thing? I also started doing a hotkey for GLTF export. So the GLTF export for Chronos, for some reason, doesn't have like an operator you can call and will get all of the settings automatically. It has an operator that you can call. Let's see if export scene.gltf is what it's called. So you've got this operator class with a bunch of helper classes and whatever, and this just kind of sits in that menu when you do file export GLTF. But you can call this operator. It's really unfortunate that they use like multi-inheritance here because that means you need to jump all over the file to figure out what's going on. But this basically has all of the properties for what you would do with a regular GLTF export. These are all set in that menu when you click the export in Blender. So you can call this operator manually, and it will just execute. The problem being that all of the defaults don't come from like your user settings. So we need to figure out how to get the GLTF settings. And then I can have a hotkey bindable GLTF export button, which a lot of people have been kind of like looking for. You can just write arbitrary Python code and get that to work, but doing it more generically, I would. So the two options are going to be either we can figure out how to do it and grab it from the settings, or we have to introduce like a second set of settings to Skeen for the GLTF hotkey export, which it would be really unfortunate to have to introduce a second place to specify those settings. Yeah, a lot of people have wanted like export on save. I'm not sold on export on save because if you're doing things like heavy geometry nodes or something, that export can take a reasonable amount of time. And personally, I like to save a lot more often than I like to export. So I'm going to make it a separate operator, and then people can bind it to their save key or whatever if they want to. Okay, so we've got width and height. They're F32s. These are also F32s because they're 0 to 1. We don't have the view here is the issue. So in our post-processing code, our layout, I guess, doesn't have the view information. That feels like a weird thing to not have in the demo. So texture sampler, uniform buffer, texture sampler. Yeah, I guess we don't have anything. So the question is it worth adding? We could cheat. We could cheat like horrendously. Instead of setting it up all properly. I guess this is going to be U32 and height. U32. And these, I think, start off at 512, so I'll start them off at 512. This will be U32s. This is kind of a don't try this at home, do something better kind of vibe. Visibility, texture, camera. This should also have post-process settings on it. So settings here are going to be, if we're going to set this, right? This is not mute, so we need to set it as mute. And then technically speaking, we should have these coming into our shader. It's kind of a bonkers way to do it because, well, is it though? I feel like the other thing I want to check is to make sure that these are on the same. Yeah, they are. So it's a little bit bonkers because technically we should be able to get this data and pass it in inside of the pipeline and then not have to worry about it and have it just be a bind group. But it is like a user side way to pass in more data. Sorry for the off topic. Can I give you an idea for a video that you really want to see on the channel? Yeah, feel free to. It doesn't mean that I will like definitely do the video, but feel free to like, hey, I would love to see this because I'm having trouble with that kind of thing. Feel free. Blender is really aggressive about saving. You move your mouse half an inch. Do you want to save your changes before you quit? Yeah. Yeah. I think the export should be separate from the save, but I think that is also something I could see being a personal preference. If you're someone who works on very lightweight Blender files and whatnot, then I could see saving and exporting being the same operation. Okay, so in our shader then, we've got this, but really we've got width as a U32 and a height as a U32. And we don't have intensity anymore. And then we don't need these. We do need coord because that's our calculation. But we do need, what do we call this, Matt? In settings. So these could be, I think these have to be F32s for the calculation. As F32 isn't really what we're going to do in a shader, we're going to do F32 like this, which is kind of like casting it. Because these are U32s, this should be fine, and then we'll get the coordinate. And threshold. So there's the threshold, right? We're back down to having a couple issues with the size of what's going on here. This isn't just a multiply by 2 situation, right? We're passing in a texture. It's coming in at a specific height and width. We're passing in the height and the width of the yeah. But the texture load doesn't solve that problem for us. So I'm pretty sure it's a problem with the multiplication and not with the sampling. You had spoken with another live asking which editors are most recommended for the Bevy engine. You think it would make a good video if you talk about them and test them as a rank tier? As a rank tier? I think, what do you mean? Which editors do you mean? You mean code editors, or do you mean visual editors, or do you mean like, because I can probably just give you options. I don't think a tier ranking is appropriate because all the ones that I can think of really have different use cases. I know tier ranking videos do really well on YouTube, but like there's no real reason to like tier rank these things. If you're doing 2D, right? Realistically, the options are you can do something completely custom. You can do something that is like just an image from a sprite. You can do for 2D, there's LDTK and tiled, right? My personal preference is LDTK if it works, unless I'm doing isometric, which, to be fair, I've really soured on doing 2D isometric over the last 2 years. I don't think you should be doing 2D isometric in general. I think most of the things people want to do 2D isometric are better done as 3D, because then you get rid of all of the weird edge cases. Like 2D isometric is just like edge case after edge case after edge case after edge case. It's a very like programmer centric approach. Whereas if you do a 3D, but you do like a pixelated kind of thing, like that can be significantly better for an isometric approach. I know that Hades was like 2D isometric originally, right? Hades 1. But Hades 2 uses a bunch of 3D models instead. So if you look at the like comparison between all the sprite sheets, Hades 1 has like just an absolutely metric ton of sprites. Because what you end up needing to do for an isometric game is like you need to pick how many angles you're going to use and then render everything out in all of those angles, right? So if you do north, south, east, west, that's 4 angles. If you double that to include the diagonals, that's 8. If you double that because 8 doesn't look quite good, you end up with like, what is it, 16 or 32. And then you need every one of those views for every directional like animation, right? So every walking animation needs that entire cycle of sprites. Every attack animation needs that entire cycle of sprites. Every, healing animation needs that entire cycle of sprites. You end up needing like mega amounts of textures to do that. And at some point, it just becomes easier to do 3D. For 3D in Bevy, I would suggest either Blender or Trench Broom. These seem to be like the two biggest toolkits that people are using to do level design and things like that. Twist, they're all S rank. So realistically, there's not a lot of like tier ranking to do per se. There's a lot of experimental editors, but ranking experimental editors seems like just a bad idea. Like ranking people's experimental work is just not a nice thing to do. Forgot that was full. Hey Chris, have you been able to get WGSL Analyzer to recognize the Bevy imports for autocomplete? So Bevy imports have been broken in WGSL Analyzer since what, Naga Oil? So it's been a number of major versions at this point. It's unfortunate. There is no real answer right now for the WGSL situation. The answer for the WGSL situation is Bevy's going to switch to Weasel, hopefully. I don't want to commit anybody to work, but it seems like there's a lot of community momentum in moving from WGSL and Bevy's like special import syntax to Weasel, which is, just like a different special import syntax, but it's a little bit more standardized and a little bit more widely used by people. It's meant to be used in more situations. and it's going to have better LSP, better editor support. So this is in my mind the real answer is I can't wait for Weasel to become the default shader language in Bevy, because it's like a strict improvement over the WGSL situation currently. You feel like a publisher would attract more game creators for the Bevy engine. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. You mean like a publishing house? So like somebody who would publish games for people? You tried to get Weasel to work so hard the other day. They should honestly remove the example from the repool because the support is so limited. I don't think they should remove the example. That is supposed to be a limited example, right? The thing about Weasel, if we look at the PRs, add support for experimental Weezer shader source. March 9th. 0.16. This must have been March 9th of last year, right? Let me see. Initially, March 9th merged on... I guess it was merged this year. So you're talking about a thing that's like been merged for like less than 6 months. There was another PR to update it, if I remember correctly. Can't find that one. Maybe it didn't mention Weasel in the title. But the Weasel implementation, like the initial introduction, was just a very, like, can we even get this to work at all? And we can get it to work. But that's like the level of Weasel support right now. Like imports don't work, etc. All of the Bevy code, you can't import any of like the internal Bevy shader code because that's all WGSL and they don't cross over. So yeah, the goal is to grow Weasel support, and that was just a foothold, is the situation with the example. So it definitely shouldn't be removed. And the intention is to move everything over. I don't know if it's going to happen for 0.18, honestly. But I know there was some desire to make it happen. Let's see. Like nowadays, Godot is very used. You think it's much more attractive than Unreal because it's lighter and such, but you believe Bevy would be for more advanced game programmers, perhaps. You feel like a publisher would attract more game creators. I don't know. I don't see how the publisher connects to the other stuff. I think right now Bevy is really good for like specialized projects, if that makes sense. Like if you're something like TinyGlade and you're like a group of supreme rendering engineers. That was not what I wanted to click on. And you're a group of like, Softronic is not the site that I want to click on. Unfortunate that their own site doesn't show up in those search results. But TinyGlade's a great example. Like they use parts of Bevy, like Bevy ECS and some other stuff. But they don't use the Bevy renderer because they started development in like 0.6, I want to say. So like they're a long time Bevy project. We're at 0.17 right now. But the ability to reach into the renderer and just make it do whatever you want, or change things, or mix and match pieces, or do things that are like very ECS intensive, Those are all things that Bevy is great at right now. Bevy is not great at like artist driven games, I guess is what I would say right now. Like if you're going to build a 2D platformer and it's going to be entirely resting on how good the art is, or if you're like building your first 2D platformer or something, like the setups for those kinds of projects are really well established in like Godot and stuff. Your WGSL analyzer solution ended up being to just copy all the imported code into a WGSL file. Yeah. I mean, that works. It's not something I would suggest everybody does, but it definitely works. A Bevy version of Godot shaders would be nice. What is Godot shaders? I think I've seen this site before. This is just like shaders meant to be used with Godot, right? I feel like for each of these, you have to effectively ship an entire Bevy application to show them off. Are they just drop-in shaders? I don't know the answer to that. They have definitely different support levels. Like there's a GLES2 label on some of these, 4X on some of them. So I wouldn't necessarily say they're drop-in like from the perspective that they'll work for everything. You're fighting for your life against mindless materials. Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. One of the interesting things about this site specifically, in that it exists like this, is that this could very much be like there's a shader outline shader here, right? And theoretically, this is the shader code and whatever. But how do you do a multi-pass jump flood algorithm on this website? Right? And I don't know if you can. And there's Bevy mod outline, for example, right? So Bevy already integrates with crates.io. So realistically, if there is a shader that people can use, it could get published to crates.io. And then you could pull those in and do a bunch of demos for all of those crates and whatnot. And that would probably work really well. But it would have to be probably like for each of those demos, it would probably have to be its own standalone Bevy application demoing each of them. Publish as crates is how they all do, right? Like the Bevy mod outline is just a crate that's published on crates.io, you know? Bevy mod outline. Right, here's Bevy mod outline. You can just install it and use it. And it's got its examples and everything. Right, if I go into the examples, it's like, here's a bunch of stuff. I don't know. Shapes, let's go to shapes. Here's shapes. Throw in the outline plugin, label some things with outline volume, and you've got outlines, right? So I don't know. I don't know that, like, I think that the way that this site currently exists is kind of an artifact of the fact that you don't have a distribution mechanism for Godot shaders beyond, like, here's some code. But maybe I'm wrong about that. I could be wrong. You tried Shadplay too, but there's not many examples. Yeah, there's Shadplay too, but Shadplay is more of a shader toy. Also, it needs a different name because it gets pulled into Shadowplay. I guess this is not running anywhere online, is it? I thought it was. I don't see a URL though. But yeah, this is like a version of Shader Toy. Cloudflare really doesn't like me for some reason. And like things like Shader Toy are really cool. And to some extent that's workable. But if you're going to pass in extra data into these pipelines, you kind of have to set up the Rust application to pass the data in, right? So, I mean, it's possible to build something. Wow, that is a lot of clicks. It's possible to build something like this site. I think that like my personal vision for something like this would be to showcase the actual projects. And thus would be to encourage people for the most part to publish crates and then display those crates on the site. It seems like one of the benefits of Bevy is because it's so data driven, you can easily swap out layers of your application with whatever works. Absolutely. Yeah. Because of the ECS, because of the way everything works, because of the way everything is architected, if you don't want to use, the entire 2D pipeline, you can just drop the entire 2D pipeline. If you want to replace the render pipelines to do some specific thing, you can do that. You can like write stuff as low level as you want with WGPU and then plug it into the rest of Bevy, etc. So like the huge benefit of Bevy for those kinds of projects, things that need to do those kinds of things. Could share the WGSL file and the binding on the Rust side. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, there's a bunch of like published crates with shaders in them. I think that pointing people to those crates would be my first priority. And then letting people upload like just arbitrary shaders would be like a second priority, but maybe also useful. Like if something was going to be, if you were going to say this uses the regular standard material stuff and all it requires is a standard material extension, then you can upload a shader that's just a standard material extension and we'll run it like in some program and show what it does. But not all shaders are like that. A lot of shaders need extra data, which requires building the application for that. Publish this crate's awesome idea. Yep. Shader toy binding crate. Cloudflare's been doing that to you too. They're going super anti-AI scraping. That would be really cool if they were. I don't really trust Cloudflare though, so we'll see. A lot of cool shader toy examples are just mapping to a flat plane and not special. Link to create a screenshot of the simplest version of the site. Link to create screenshot. Yeah, I would want to be able to update things pretty easily. I could see people doing published releases of their crates and then having like outdated showcases on this site. It would be very cool though. I wonder if we could do that as like a regular static site. We could build a Leptos site. That Leptos site could potentially be responsible for building a bunch of like Bevy applications for WASM. Obviously we would have like a default stock Bevy that had everything in it that you could just plug shaders into. So you could have like a 0.16 shader or whatever, and that would just work for basically ever. If there was a WASM player for them, that would be the ultimate. Yeah, that's the other thing. Not all shaders are WASM compatible. Right? Like, not all shaders and setups and ways of using data are WASM compatible. Especially if you're using WebGL. right? If you're using a web GPU, things get a little bit better. If you're using native APIs, things get a lot worse in terms of web support. If you try to run WebGL on the web, WebGL kind of like doesn't support things like storage buffers, which really limits what you can do. But maybe that's just a whole category, right? Maybe there's like, for each version of Bevy, we build a WebGL version of Bevy, a web GPU version of Bevy, and like a well, we can't build a native version of Bevy, but yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it would have to be only web compatible stuff, or it would have to be all like curated and screenshots taken and GIFs created and stuff like that, you know? Which is cool. I think it could be a cool site. I don't know that there's a lot, like enough people doing work to showcase there, but if there were, we could definitely do that. I would definitely fit with the whole like I do This Week in Bevy every week, right? And we could have like a partner site to This Week in Bevy that is like Bevy shaders or something. That just displays like all the crates and all the things that you can do with Bevy shaders. I don't know. It's a thought. I've got a ton of projects to do. My first priority is doing Rust Adventure stuff. If you've seen previous streams this week, I've been doing a bunch of like Rust language stuff for Rust Adventure. That's my current priority. A bevy of shaders, you might say. Stomp father. I am really not sure entirely why we're getting this little edge. I think it's because we're doing this multiplication. So can we just do either mix or smooth step with the threshold? Doesn't seem like it. Seems like we kind of miss on this. Doesn't show up when it's white. Yeah. If you want to go wild, you can compile non-WebGL, run in a VM, capture the video output in a GIF, but it seems like it'll work. Yeah, I would run that on my local machine, is what I would do. I would compile it locally, run it, take some videos or whatever, put them as WebPs, and then upload them to the site. That's what would happen. It wouldn't be, probably wouldn't be very automated. Which just means that if people update their stuff, that there's work for me every time they update their stuff. Which would kind of be unfortunate, but it would be fine. You mentioned scrapers, but you notice I don't think they're worth spending any time on at all. I wish they would go away in general. I have no appreciation for AI generated code at all. And I wish it would die in a fire. Also, just to be clear, anything that I produce, not licensed to put into an AI model. So don't shove it into some AI model. Really not sure exactly why that little edge is coming up, but maybe I'll look into it later. Maybe some little anti-aliasing. Pretty sure it's not because of the multiplication. We tried using mix. This is going to be from 0 to 1 here. And like the pure white version of it doesn't have those edges as far as I can tell. Right? If we click this and we zoom into it. It does. There it is. It's there. It's just hard to see with the white. Right? So some of the pixels don't line up here. So we'll have to kind of fix that. Maybe, maybe not, but you mean it's on GitHub, so for sure it's already in Copilot? Yeah, I mean people taking my work and shoving it into AI models is not really something I can stop them from doing. But it's definitely against my wishes. Right. Like the reason I can make videos and do streams and stuff is because I make money off of the content that I produce. If I don't make any money off the content that I produce because Microsoft or somebody is stealing it to redistribute it. I mean, people who use AI aren't going to use my stuff anyway. But it's generally a bad thing overall. AI sucks. It causes like major problems when people try to learn anything because all of its information is out of date and it gives you things like if you ever use AI to generate stuff that you don't understand, there's no way that you can validate whether it's giving you accurate stuff or not. So you're just kind of like, well, it worked on my machine, you know? Okay, so I'm going to move on from this, I think. I think that most of this is okay. I don't know how far I'm going to go with this demo. I think that it's pretty good already. We took a look at Ape Out fairly recently. This is GameStop, and GameStop is not what I want. So at least look at Steam. Ape Out has a very similar effect. So I don't know if I'm going to build a game demo using this technique. I probably won't build like all of Ape Out, for example, but IMO, the thing we can all look forward to is that LLMs are never actually going to be good at writing code because they're not a suitable model for coding, and they certainly don't make any money. So that's true. They are all effectively burning VC bucks and giving VC bucks back to each other to fund the entire operation. So that's going to crash at some point. Looks like endoparasite. I've never seen endoparasite. What is endoparasite? Endoparasitic? This is going to be limb ripping off for anybody who is sensitive to that. It's not realistic, but yeah. This is, yeah, not the same thing. Well, actually, let's see. Looks like it might be visibility mesh with a limit filled in by different shapes. That's kind of cool. I think the more direct demo. Oh, that's the other thing I want to do. Let's open up Blender and see if we can produce a GLTF that'll work. Let me see Blender. We don't have Skeen installed here. We don't have BRP set up at all. So the question really becomes, how much of that effort do I want to put in? I think we don't need Skeen for this because I know what to do, but let's do a delete here. Let's do Z. And let's just test a little bit. Let's get a plane in here. Scale it to, I don't know, 2. And then maybe another plane. Or maybe we'll extend this. Maybe we'll subdivide. Loop cut is not this. So we'll subdivide here. I don't know what this is going to do to the actual like situation that we are under. I'm going to extrude here. We actually don't need all that subdivision now that I think about it. I don't know why I subdivided. Because we can do not that extrude, but actually, did I just create an additional vertex? Extrude, scale. Scale it down a little, extrude again. And I don't actually know how this data is going to come in. So what we're going to do is export just, we can do a collection exporter actually. We don't want the camera, we don't want the light. We just want the plane. Right? And we'll export this as GLTF. This directory is somewhere. This directory is, let's see. You'll use Skeen. Blender seems like the ideal level, apart from maybe Trench Broom or Tile Editor. Yeah. Yeah, people seem to like Trench Broom in general, but Trench Broom is very strictly like less capable at doing stuff than Blender is. But some people find the simplicity of having those restrictions very useful. Let's see, Rust Adventure and GitHub. Can Chris navigate the Blender file system? There we go. Active examples, visibility mesh assets. We're going to do this as a GLTF. We'll export this. I'll make Blender smaller. We'll look at the GLTF. The GLTF is just going to be a scene with a plane. The plane is going to have some primitives. I don't know, because I haven't tried to do 2D stuff out of Blender. I know that other people have. I don't know if this is the right view angle to use for it. So let's just give it a whirl here. See, main, we've got shapes somewhere in here. Right, these shapes are what we're spawning currently. Let's get rid of all of these shapes. Let's do... How am I going to do this? We've got to do an asset load. We could write a system to wait for the asset to be loaded and then immediately spawn it, which I think is what I'm going to do. Right, so we end up with a reader that is a message reader is what we're calling it these days for asset event. And this is going to be for GLTF. And I think this has to be mute. So reader.read, right? So for event in reader.read. Match event. We really only care about one of these, so we could do a let or a let else or whatever, but I'm going to do loaded with dependencies and everything else. This will end up giving us the GLTFs. So this will be res assets GLTF. And we'll call this GLTF assets, I guess. Usually I call it like GLTFs or something, but I don't know that that's particularly clear. We'll get by the ID. Unwrap because we're in the loader, so it should just work. And now we have our GLTF. I think this needs to be a reference. Or maybe I was mistaken. It needs to be a D reference. So I think the interesting thing here is that this scene is going to come in as like a mesh 3D. But we want it to be a mesh 2D. So if we look at the GLTF asset, this gives us the scenes, but the scene here isn't really necessarily what we want. Question, is it possible to export just vertex points and transforms of meshes that are exported separately? Just vertex points and transforms of meshes that are exported separately. You mean like export a list of vertices and then separately, what would the transforms be associated with if they were completely separate? I guess I don't really understand the question because a mesh is just a list of vertices and indices, right? So why would you separate them? We can go into meshes here. We can go into named meshes and grab the GLTF mesh, which will give us the primitives. Say you place meshes in a scene. Wow, I can talk. In Blender and save those transforms as a file format for loading at runtime. Yeah, what do you mean by that? Isn't that what every export format already does? Right? Like you place meshes in a scene. You could place empties there instead. And have meshes in a different scene. And then place things on the empties. Right? Yeah, I'm just not really grabbing like why, like what the purpose of the question is. Like, what is the question? How do you export stuff? Because you just export to GLTF or you export to like another recognizable format that everybody has agreed on. You can create your own formats and your own exporters, but like, I don't really see why you would do that in the general case. I think that I just want to grab the primitive in this case. So if we're going to do that, we're going to need the primitive assets. We're going to need the mesh assets. GLTF primitives. GLTF meshes. So the Bevy mesh is actually a GLTF primitive. A GLTF mesh is actually a combination of a couple things. So it's a set of primitives and some extras, right? It's a collection of primitives. These primitives have then the materials and stuff on them. Bevy only imports these as 3D. So it would be standard material or whatnot. Like export into a folder with multiple GLTFs that are referenced by a main file. I feel like I don't understand what you're asking. You can absolutely export multiple GLTFs. You can absolutely export one GLTF with a bunch of stuff in it. You can export things in all sorts of ways. If that's your question, then yes. Wouldn't SVG be a better format for a 2D game? Why would SVG be a better format for a 2D game? What do you think SVG would give you that a mesh wouldn't? I don't really understand what you're asking in the first place here. Like you're asking about like separating vertices and transforms and stuff, but I don't know why. Like you can make Blender do whatever you want, right? I could write a custom exporter that exports things into, I don't know, like a Chris Biscardi OBJ file, and then read that in and use that instead. That's totally a valid way to do things. But the question is like, why would you do it that way? That's why I keep asking them why they're asking. Like, what is the, like, are they asking generally, like, how do you export stuff because they don't know about Blender? Are they asking because they don't know what meshes are? Are they, like, the SVG spec is complicated, right? If you're just looking for a list of points, that's what a mesh is. You can absolutely export like curves and stuff. So yeah, I mean, to some extent, so in some sense, it's all project specific. But like, You don't have a use case, so it's hard to answer whatever question you're asking here. Right? Like you're just kind of asking, can I export stuff in different ways? And like, yes, you can. You can export stuff. You could pack an individual vertex on a USB, ship it to your friend, have them reconstruct it in some random file format they designed, and then load it in. But like, why would you do that? GLTF meshes dot get. We're gonna go with named meshes. You should fire up Blender and try yourself. Absolutely. It seems like you don't have a use case for what you're asking, and you don't have like an understanding of what you can currently do. So like just fire up Blender. It's got the default cube. Export a GLTF file and take a look at the JSON. All the vertices will be in the bin file, so you won't really be able to look at them directly, but there's a bunch of different file formats you can export to. Named meshes dot get. What is our named mesh called? It's like plain or something, right? I didn't even name it. Yeah. Plain. And this is going to be unwrapped as well, I think. Right. Option handle. And this is a little bit verbose because what I'm doing is I'm reaching into the GLTF file, deep inside the GLTF file to grab one specific GLTF primitive. If you're just spawning a scene, this is like a one-liner. GLTF mesh. And this is going to be the actual mesh. I happen to know that this GLTF mesh has one primitive, so we're just going to look for the first primitive. And that's just how we just have our primitive, so we don't need to go for the assets for the primitive. Why is that telling me it's an issue though? Because it needs to be a reference, that's fine. Your bindless material is mostly working, only missing getting the correct texture ID. 205 to 240 FPS on bindless, 140 to 165 on non-bindless. Interesting. How many textures are you using? Because that would be, what, the difference in texture upload, effectively, to the GPU, causing that FPS drop? That was one of the other paths that I was considering going down for the material layering thing that I'm working on. Because right now the material layering thing that I'm working on, which I think I have a running example of. Actually, it's in the same thing, but in a different folder. Does this run? Yeah. So this is like the very first demo of a material layering thing. Then I went with the texture 2D arrays for the next demo, or the next thing that I was working through. And now I'm trying to bring it back for the third demo to be kind of like arbitrarily stacked. But that's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm kind of taking a bunch of textures, throwing them through the standard material stuff. And the options were basically use 2D texture arrays to pack all of those textures into one file, or use bind list and try to figure out how to access the textures independently. I went with the 2D texture array approach, but you posted your material in the Discord on your thread asking for help about the texture ID. Cool. Take a look later. So this GLTF primitive is a mesh, right? So here we're going to do commands that spawn mesh 2D in this case is what we're going to try to do here. I can never remember the order of these two words. Mesh material 2D. Cool. We're just going to do a white color, transform default. If I can spell transform correctly, then everything will work out. Why does into not work on mesh material 2D? Shouldn't it? Unsatisfied trait bound from that. Oh, because it's, yeah, okay, okay. Let's grab materials and meshes. And this is going to be materials dot insert. No, it's not going to be insert dot add. That, and then commands is going to be mute commands. And then we're still going to have our into issue because materials.add color. Oh, it's already color. I guess we only need color here. Primitives.mesh .clone, I think is the right move here. So theoretically, this should spawn something. I don't know if it's going to be spawned in the right direction or anything. So let's add this to the update systems. Let's do an asset server load here. We're going to do derive resource struct. I'm just going to call this like level. And in our startup system, I'm going to do asset server. Asset server dot load. I'm kind of taking shortcuts here. If you can't tell. Insert resource level. So we're going to use the asset server to load that GLTF. We're going to shove it into this level struct. We're going to insert that as a resource. It's going to keep the handle around. This load GLTF will fire when that GLTF is actually done loading in, at which point we're going to try to pull this one little mesh out of it and insert that into the world. And we are going to hope that the stuff is in the right spot. And we're going to label this an obstacle. So there's definitely something going on here. Did I mess up my shader earlier? Screen texture, return. So here's our screen texture. I didn't put this on the other render layer, is one of the issues. Right, all of our visibility meshes are on that one render layer. Right, and we could throw an info in here just to like, but from these logs, I think we already have it, right? We've got a mesh 2D, it's got a triangle list. The path to it is GLTF mesh 0 primitive 0. So that is the correct thing to be trying to find. The question is this rotated in the right direction and things like that? We might need to go through the vertices and like reorder them ourselves. Just because of the way we wrote the 2D visibility implementation. On a map with 49 textures, the performance on both modes are comparable. Interesting. So for lower texture counts, they're getting packed. For higher texture counts, they're hitting that limit. Is 16 the limit for the bindless array? 16 textures? I feel like it's something like 12 or 16. The other thing I want to do here is like log the mesh. Oh, dot mesh. That's why. What is the issue there? Required by bound, trait into asset ID mesh is not implemented for handle mesh. That feels weird, right? Oh, there we go. Yeah, it does want the reference. It still has an issue with the reference, but I assume this issue is different. Argument never used. Perfect. So let's look for spawning. Oh, it runs that fast. Okay, we don't have spawning to look for, unfortunately. It is too far gone. Let's get rid of this other log. This is coming from intersect. So here's our mesh. Here's our normals. Here's our positions. So we've got -2, 2, 2, 2. These are not in the order that we would need them to be in, generally speaking. We kind of want them to be, let's say, sorted in reverse angle order. So there are two options. One of which is write the ray tracing to work with arbitrary triangles. Yeah, there's also XCN, and we also need them XY. So a little bit of mesh reworking here. One thing that we could do for all of these is do the same kind of processing. So how do we create our other mesh? Here we've got our load. Here's our visibility mesh. So here is going to be our, I don't know, level mesh, we'll call it. We'll create a new mesh. And we need to grab the primitives off of this. So we actually do need the mesh here. And we will get what? Mesh attribute. We do this down below too. Maybe not in this file. Maybe we do it in a different file, but we do it. Yada yada. We'll grab this. We'll bring it up here. This is a little bit of a hack. I do want to point out, like the thing I'm doing here is kind of just playing with the 2D data. Or playing with the mesh data to reorganize it into something that'll work for 2D. There are other approaches we could take. So we've got positions. Positions.iter. We want to map this from, this is an array, right? So we've got like X, Y, Z into X, Y, 0. I think if we're going to sort this, we need the 3, we still need all 3 for the actual mesh construction. And I do kind of want to order them. Hey, just passing by, not much time. Sorry, you would filter to only keep the edges connected to only one triangle to get the boundary? You would filter to get the only keep the edges connected to only one triangle to get the boundary. Keep the edges to only one triangle to get the boundary. Yeah, I think there's 2 things here. One is that we do actually want the mesh to render, right? And the other is that we want to use it as an obstacle for the visibility. Those are 2, I don't want to say competing constraints, but they have different requirements. The mesh that's going to be rendered needs to be turned into triangles. The mesh that we use for the boundary only needs to be kind of like ordered in the boundary order. I think for arbitrary meshes that come from something like Blender, it would be incredibly hard for us to what a weird situation that's happening there. Sorry, I got distracted. So if we're going to pull in stuff from Blender and we're going to do arbitrary triangles, then we might want to just change the algorithm to work on arbitrary triangles. I'm kind of like, I was kind of just forging ahead here in the idea that we can get all these vertices from that mesh. We can order them any way we want to. We can stick them into a new mesh and we can use it like that. But from a user perspective, like if somebody's going to drop this in from Blender, the only really thing they want to do is turn it into like a 2D mesh, right? So for us, I don't actually want to do this flip, right? For example, because this is XZ, right? XZ for our Blender scene, right? This is Z up, and we're operating on XY, but those get flipped. Because those get flipped, I think we want to operate on XZ. It's an interesting idea because there's world space, there's local space, right? And if Blender's exporting our mesh with XZ coordinate changes, that means that Y in Blender is Z in our mesh data. So we actually want to do something like this and view it from front and have a plane. Feels a little bit weird. Right, but this is kind of what we want. And let's just start with this because it's going to be a little bit easier rather than making arbitrary shapes. And I'll lower this case for a second. This can go, so this is all going to be what we had before, and I'm still going to keep this spawn log here. We've re-exported the GLTF, so we should see XZ or XY. This is no longer named plane, is it? Hang on. Plane 001. So with this, we end up with XY coordinates, which is good. Because that's really what we want. We don't have to do any like manipulation of the data here because we've done it correctly in Blender. So we end up with what? Negative, positive, negative, positive. So it's kind of like a zigzag in this scenario. But that should be fine. We should just see an empty wall, right? So I'm getting the kind of vibe that this is like just extremely small is really all that's going on here. Because one unit, it's going to be weird, right? Because one unit um, in Blender's 3D world is 1 unit. It's like 1 meter, right? But 1 unit in Bevy's 2D world is very different. So the question here is, how do I get macOS to re-minimize this window? Exit full screen. Okay. I think there's a couple of things we can do. One of which is scale everything up. So 1 pixel should be, let's say 50. I think we aren't accounting for scale though, is the only other thing that I'll say. So maybe we want to apply this to the actual vertex data instead. Why is this? What am I supposed to be passing into scale? Vec3. Splat 50. I think we aren't accounting for scale in our calculations currently. So we see this little line here. Splat. Just did a bit of research. You could write a Python script to convert those meshes to empties with URIs and save them as GLTF separate. I mean, yeah, like you have access to all the data. You can do anything you want with it. Like that was never in question. The question was, what are you actually trying to achieve? Right? Because if like the vertex data is already stored in a separate file, right? For a GLTF. This bin file is the vertex data. This GLTF file is just all of the nodes and like scene hierarchy stuff. So the vertex data is already separated into a separate bin, and the positions are already separated into a separate file. So if that's the question, GLTF already does that, right? If you wanted to just like arbitrarily put that information into different files, you can totally do that. But like there's no like why? The idea is if you have many levels, GLTFs, and you want to reuse furniture in your game. I think you're optimizing for something that you don't even have the problem yet, right? Like if you're telling me that you don't know how Blender works and you're trying to optimize the way that GLTF stores data, you're solving the wrong problem. If you're trying to do GLTF cross references, that's not a thing, right? There is a GLXF, or I guess what used to be called GLXF. I don't know what it's called these days. There's a theoretical GLTF external reference like spec, but honestly, this doesn't seem like it's making much progress at all. It exists, But I haven't seen anybody like really do anything with it. PC Walton has a prototype implementation of it. Bevy GLXF loader. It has some limitations and whatever. And really, this is only a stopgap for BSN. Yeah, GLTF external references is still work in progress. For the moment, you have to work around. My suggestion would be get to the point at which one GLTF file doesn't work for you first. Right? Like, like make enough levels to where that's a problem and then solve the problem. Right? I also think that trying to share assets amongst GLTF files is also kind of a misdirection. If you have enough in different levels to have different files, just have different GLTF files that completely encapsulate what's needed to spawn the level. Right? It's significantly easier. You can build everything in all scenes. You can use multiple blend files with all of your different, collection instances and whatever. You'll still have only one piece of furniture in each file. And then all of your levels have all of the data they need to be able to actually render. It's significantly simpler. I don't think duplication in that sense is really a thing that you should be worrying about if you have not opened Blender and don't have 50 game levels. Okay, so confirmed that the scale doesn't really do anything here. Right. So I think for our case, we don't actually want transform scale. We want to mutate this mesh. This needs to become a mute. This needs to become a get mute. This needs to become a mute. Meshes is mute already. Let's log this out. Positions. For position in mute positions. I guess we don't have to have mute positions because it's already mute, right? So position dot 0 times equals, we'll call it 50. And there's our situation. So we were talking earlier about how this rectangle is going to have cross-cutting corners, and we can see that here, right? Like there's no right side wall, so this is just drawing some of the other stuff. If we re-enable the color pass here, we don't see anything because it's on a different render layer. Do we still have the, actually, this is only the wireframe for, I'm going to have to code in some render layer debugging if this is going to be the way that the demo plays out. Because theoretically, where's our render layer here? Here's render layer. This is just this, right? Here's our square. The vertices are all pushed out to 50. Mesh has rotate by, which mutates all positions. Transform by, translate by. It has transform by? Let me look at that. Functions I've never seen before. Okay, translated by. Translate the vertex position of the meshes in place by the given vec3. Oh, sick. AABBs are not updated automatically. Cool, good to know, good to know. So theoretically, translate by vec3. Uh, 50, 50, 0 is what we'll go with. Because we really just don't want Z, right? We want all Z's to be kind of on the same thing. That doesn't look like, that looks like it moved it. Translated by, translate by. I think that adds that to all of the mesh entities. Transformed by, transforms. The documentation here could use an improvement. I think it's a translation. Yeah, the warning is only important if you're mutating a mesh that is already being used on a mesh 3D. Yeah, that makes sense. So theoretically, we want transform by then, because really we want to scale. There it is. So everything that comes in from Blender, which is like a single unit, 1 meter in 3D world, you think there's already scale bias there? Did I just not? Yeah, there is. Oh man. Let's do scale by. This is the problem when you okay. So I think I want this to be 50-50, maybe 1, maybe 0. I haven't decided what we want to do here. 0 is like erasing any Z index that we have in Blender. So maybe we do want 1. And then if something looks weird, it's always Blender's fault. Cool. And then we comment that out and we get our shade situation. We don't have a container anymore, which is why it looks like this. Where is our container? Polyline, rectangle, spawn, obstacle. I think it's this one. So this works. As long as you don't consider the ordering here of the vertices. So really the decision now is, do we rewrite this to work on arbitrary triangles? Because that's going to be the easiest way to work with like a Blender designed level. Because right now the issue is the vertex ordering is, if I remember correctly, bottom left, bottom right, top left, top right, which ends up being bottom angle, top angle. So like forming an X that's capped on bottom and top, which is why we're getting the visibility looking into this wall on the right-hand side that it shouldn't really be looking into. The code for doing that is not terrible. It just means we build even more walls. So since I think we have like a Blender example working, I don't think there's any way for us to control the ordering here in Blender. Right, like these vertices are not going to be calculated as triangles until it exports to GLTF. So we could take the option of manually drawing in the vertices, maybe. That might work. We could also try to look at a variety of other things that could be interesting. I think that the most straightforward thing to do is actually just to code the algorithm to work on triangles instead of the like bounding box that we've been trying to use. I think we have some questions there. The other thing in my head is that we're doing all of this on the CPU right now, and theoretically we could do all of this on the GPU as well to get significant performance benefits. I think those are two different examples. So I'm not terribly concerned about the performance of this example. Like it's mostly fine, right? Like things work, right? But with many vertices, we aren't really culling anything. There isn't even any frustum culling at the moment. We're just grabbing all meshes that are spawned. Or actually, yeah, we're grabbing all meshes that have an obstacle component on them. So that effectively means all meshes that are spawned, which means that anything off screen will also be being calculated. We're not doing any frustum culling. We're not doing any culling of invisible stuff at all, right? I forget what that one's called off the top of my head. Ambient occlusion? No. Yeah. Anyway, like if there was a square behind this that we knew was blocked or something like that. So there's a lot like we could do. I'm generally happy with the demo so far. I think that the building a level out in Blender is kind of the next thing, so to speak. We're only spawning in this one plane, although now because we're spawning this in like we are, I think we can actually spawn in the scene instead. Because we aren't actually doing anything other than mutating the meshes. So in main, we have this low GLTF system. In this case, we probably just want to iterate over all meshes and then multiply them by 50 rather than grab a specific one. So like gltf dot meshes dot iter. This is going to be a handle. And then we'll do effectively the same thing here. We're going to do the get. We have to go through all the primitives. So there's no primitives field on the gltf, if I remember correctly, but let's check. Yeah, primitives aren't a resource. So we got to go to every gltf mesh, and then we have to go into every primitive, and then we have to get every mesh. So this is not dot meshes. Wait, it is dot meshes, right? Sorry, the name going back and forth, because meshes for gltf is a gltf mesh. So yes, this is gltf mesh. We'll get the mesh handle. This will be gltf meshes get mesh handle. This is going to be filter map. So if for some reason we can't find anything, it's just going to not use it. But it won't error out either. So we end up with gltf meshes. And I think we want to flat map this. gltf mesh dot primitives. Right, and then we get gltf primitives in our mesh handle up here. So for primitive in this, primitive dot mesh. I guess we want to get these one by one too, right? So we could do that. I think mesh, like get mute might cause an issue here, but let's find out. So we actually end up with for mesh, right? For mute mesh in, and then we do our mesh thing. This get mute does feel like it's going to be a problem. Yeah, returns a reference to a capture variable which escapes the closure body. Yeah, that's fine. We don't need to do this. Right, so then mesh here is going to be a primitive. This is going to be let some mesh equal this, and this is going to be primitive. It's going to be okay and not option, or this is going to be because I didn't do the else yet. Yeah. So we just take that mutation that we were doing for the get mute because we captured meshes in the closure, and we move it into our for, and then we get mesh scale by, and that should scale everything. So we should be able to get rid of this specialized logic now, and this will just scale every gltf mesh that comes in. And then we shouldn't really need this per se. The one thing we will need is to put obstacle on the meshes that we spawn. So this is going to be, I think what I really want to do here is commands.spawn in this. This can be scene root. Is default scene a number? Thought it was a handle. Option handle. I mean, we have to clone that anyway, but. So we see that the square is no longer there because the square is now not have obstacle on it, right? Let's get rid of this. Let's drag this over here, do these. Right? This should be spawning the rectangle. It doesn't feel like it is, though. Default scene. Did I do something wrong is the question. Spawning default scene. Scene root. Observe. Scene, I guess we'll just call this ready. On scene instance ready. Ready for children. Ready. Use the macro. Why isn't scene instance ready in the prelude? There's a question for you. So it's ready. It should be spawning. That should be our little square scene. Let's make sure that some of these actually got scaled. One mesh gets scaled. Perfect. And then we spawn the default scene. So this mesh should be here. I think the thing that is an issue is that we are going to get basically a bunch of children that are oriented towards 3D. So we'll call this query. This will be a query for the entity, the mesh 3D, and the mesh material 3D. And all we're going to do here is for entity in query. Realistically, we should be iterating down the children to find this, but we only have one thing that we're spawning in. So I'm just going to take a shortcut for the second. We're going to remove mesh 3D, if that's the right way to write that. (3D). Remove mesh material 3D, standard material. Does it need standard material in it? Yes, it does. So this is entity mesh material. The material actually we're just gonna ditch. Honestly, we could do more interesting things, right? We could do, where's our meshes and materials? Here's our meshes and materials, right? I think we only need materials here. So if we have materials, why is this yelling at me in all red? It's not because of the materials, is it? What did I do? Oh, commands. One of the tricky parts of writing code that's nested like this is up here, we have commands that's in our load GLTF system. And here we're using it to spawn. And then here I've copied something in or I've written some code that uses commands and it thinks that I'm trying to pull that in from the above when really I just want it to be an argument to this observer. You can avoid this by writing the observer as a separate function, but again, I'm kind of taking shortcuts. Bum, 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 bum. Cool, so we've removed some stuff and we also want to insert mesh 2D with mesh.0 handle and insert materials or mesh material 2D materials.add. Do I have access to the actual material or this is just a handle? Thought I was going to be cool and use the base color. Let's just shove color white in here for a second. So this is then now a GLTF that we're loading in. When it loads in, we scale all of the meshes by 50. We also stick an observer in here. Yes, it's nested code. Yes, I could remove that. Yes, I could, there's things I can do here. I'm just kind of like writing code of stream. But we could definitely, let's just do that actually. Why not? Replace 3D mats with 2D is what we're going to call this function. FN replace. No suggestions. VS Code. All of this AI you're trying to throw at me, and you can't even give me the suggestion of the thing that I just wrote in the file. Here's our system. We can't currently get. Let's do materials, standard, res, assets, standard material. And let's do, I think it's going to be linear if we get it like this. So materials, standard.get, material.0, right? And then this has to exist at this point. And then we want base color. So we actually do get to color these inside of Blender if we want to now. Even though I think I just colored this white in Blender. Your certain Rust Rover suggestions got worse since AI too. Yeah. I would really appreciate more investment in high signal tools rather than low signal tools. Is really where I land on it. Like when I get a suggestion, I want it to be like 95% of the time plus the right suggestion. I want it to be based in fact. And then at that point, I actually don't care if like it doesn't give me a suggestion every time, because when it does give me a suggestion, I can rely on it. So we just kind of like do these replacements. Where's our Blender thing? I don't think we have a material on this right now. We have, yeah, if we put a material on this and Blender crashes, what's going on? And then we change the base color to like blue and we re-export. Then this should be blue. So really, all things considered, even though we went down kind of like a rabbit hole of, you know, write some prototype code, make it work, then make it better. This is really just iterating over all of the meshes in a scene because we're in a 2D world, not a 3D world. And when we spawn these in, we want them to be 2D. So we spawn it and then we replace the 3D materials with 2D materials. We could reach into the scenes here and do this work too, but this is good enough for me for now. And then we reach into these entities that have 3D materials and 3D meshes, and we turn them into 2D materials and 2D meshes, which means that we can now use Blender to arbitrarily build levels. That doesn't mean that we wrote our ray casting to work correctly with those material or with those meshes. But yeah, because here we also need dot insert obstacle. Sometimes my brain blanks out. Something weird with suggestions. Maybe some of you have the same issue on YouTube after searching Rust something a few times. You know, I got suggestions to watch something related to a game or a movie. Yeah, the survival game Rust. Or I think there is a movie called Rust. That was the movie with all the lawsuits around it, if I remember correctly. So there's a lot of other Rust stuff on the internet. Our Rust is hilarious for people posting from the game. People come into my Discord for like Rust adventure stuff, and they're like, I'm having trouble with my mouse and whatever. And I'm like, huh, you really sound like you are trying to play a survival game, but all the information you've given me could also apply to trying to build a Bevy game. So I'm going to ask you, but I'll just like let you know softly that this is for a programming language and not for a video game. So generally happy with this. I think that we can, I think for stream, we can call this pretty much done for like the demo, the 2D visibility demo. I don't know that we'll work on it much more in the future. If I shift D this and move it like over here, and then I export, you know what would be really cool actually? If I had hot reloading on, but I don't. Features Bevy file watcher. Is that it? I think they're in the same spot. I think that's two meshes in the same spot is what's happening there. Why are they in the same spot? Let me do a delete of this and a add of a circle. And then we scale this like 1.5. Something feels off here. Assets, GLTF, separate, export. We aren't spawning individual meshes, right? We're spawning the scene. Default scene as ref unwrap, replace. Yeah. Yeah, I logged in the console that the file changed. That's for sure. Let me take the regular visual and let me move this over here and see if that moves. Oh, you know what? That's really funny, actually. I'm not scaling the translations. So when I put the square to the top right, it was only like 2 pixels to the top right. So let me shift D this again and put it over here. I will it actually is working. So give me a second to write this piece of code. Kill that. Where's our GLTF? Load GLTF. And we aren't just scaling by, but we are what? Scaling the transform? Question about new APIs that I've discovered today, or that have been given as information to me by Hukasu. It's better to apply the transform in Blender. What do you mean by that? Because remember, the issue here is that 1 unit in Blender is 1 pixel in Bevy. That's the issue. So if I take this, which Shift Z, and I move this like way over here, right? And I export this. This is like a few pixels to the right, right? So we can see a little bit more now. that this is like every 1 unit is 1 pixel. There is no transform in Blender. There is no scaling anywhere either, right? Doing the scale on the meshes here is taking what is effectively 1 unit. There's no scale in Blender right now. How do I bring this up? Right, there's no scale is 1 in Blender right now. Right. So you're saying that I should bring this up to 50 by 50 in Blender and not do scaling inside of the application? You're going to have to clarify what you mean, because the moved mesh is moving by like singular pixels, right? Right. This is the moved mesh. We're only operating on each individual mesh. So if multiple objects use the same mesh, that will be scaled exactly 1 time. The transform is what we need to scale. Yes. Like the offset, right? We need to scale that. But this is like an offset of 17 pixels by 11 pixels. Actually, this might not be visible very well on stream because I was messing with stuff. This is 17 meters in Blender and 11 meters in Blender, but this is 17 pixels by 11 pixels. What do you... I understand what Control A is. What are you anticipating? What are you anticipating this to do? Right? Like, I know what you're telling me to do, but what are you anticipating that it does? Right? Oh, it does go over there. Why does that scale like that? That's really weird. That is also pretty awkward in terms of working with this. Right? So every time that I would need to change something like this, right? Then I would also need to apply transforms. The vertices will be in the range 10, 12. So multiplying by 50 will put it in the right place. It sets the object origin into the world origin. Yeah. We'll also fix the issue, but not in an artist-friendly way. The vertices are no longer 1, 1, and they are 10, 12, and 16, 18. Gotcha. So that applies the transform to the vertices. So the reason that works is because we're scaling the vertices, which I think is counterintuitive, right? Like applying transforms so that the vertices scale feels like an awkward way to scale the offset. Yeah. The center is at the center of the world if you apply transforms, definitely. We already have the primitive mutably, like literally right here. Right, that's the code that I was about to write. After that, if you need to know the position of the entity you're moving, it will not make sense. Yeah, because the origin will be the global origin of that entity, right? Rather than being the center of the actual thing. Right? I could write a little piece of code to show that, but that's kind of what I was getting at earlier, right? Like, yes, you can apply transforms, but that recenters it to global center. So the vertices are offset from that global center. That is not the same thing as moving something in the world, right? And the only reason this works is because we're scaling the vertex positions, right? So we have effectively made, we have converted what is a transform into a vertex transform, or like a vertex position transform. We're trying, okay, so this 50-50 here, we're applying this to the scene specifically because 1 unit in Blender is 1 pixel in Bevy 2D, right? 1 unit in Blender in Bevy 3D is like 1 meter to 1 meter, right? So everything's sized appropriately. But 1 unit in Blender, if you're using it in 2D, Bevy's 1 unit in 2D is 1 pixel. So what we've done is we've made 1 pixel 50 pixels, right? So we're scaling the idea of like Bevy's single unit. Does that make sense? That's the code that I was going to write before Hukasu. I like I literally, here's a commented out piece of code that was going to be transformed by like transform default with scale. Right? That is not equivalent to the code I already have, is it? You were asking if there's a way to change the Bevy scale so that 1 unit equal the number of pixels we want. Well, you could change the camera. We could back out and do that. Let's, can I undo this transform change? Okay, so this now has its transform. Right, because we still want the center of that to be the center of the thing. Are we scheming? We're not actually scheming. Right, so this is what, 2 by 2 by default, actually. So this is 1, 2, 3. Right, so in the current situation, we export this. It has the transform on it. And now everything is extremely tiny, right? Where is our... So when we do this, we would have to set our circle to like 1 pixel or something, which is kind of awkward. So now everything's super tiny, right? And then we go to our camera, and our camera can be, what? We had the fixed vertical on here at one point. We don't currently have it on, right? But basically, yes, we can zoom the camera. The issue with zooming the camera is that we are then working with like units that are ones, right? Ones place units. And I don't see why we would be working in ones units. Well, you would be making 1 meter 1 pixel, right? If we leave it like this, 1 meter is 1 pixel. So in that case, we can work in Blender like that, right? But to do things that we want to do here, this is effectively 2 pixels right now, right? So if we multiply this by 10, this should like reasonably show up. So these are like a reasonably appropriate size now. And if we look at Blender, then they are 20 by 20 pixels, which I think matches with our circle, which is a radius of 10, I think. Circle is radius of 10, right? Yeah, circle is radius of 10. So these are 20 by 20 pixels now, and they are 20 by 20 in Blender. And then the movements we're making are in pixels, individual pixels. So we can totally do this. Right? Like this works. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. We could scale the camera later or whatnot, right? Or maybe this is the right scale for the game. But this is all fine. I was scaling earlier as a shortcut. Is the official verb skeening? I'll let somebody else pick the official verb for that, I guess. This is actually just manually working with Blender stuff, though. This is actually 2D. We could do we could do skeen. This is just in a repo that doesn't have skeen installed. And we have to do a bunch of processing anyway. So let's see, where are we? We are on... Let's do skeen equals 0.3. I don't know if skeen is like the right thing to use in these demos. Like I don't know that introducing the library makes it easier to process for people. Main obstacle. Because like right now we're inserting obstacle when we do our processing here. I could leave a little note that's like obstacle inserted in Blender, right? So we run this, skeen comes in. We don't have skeen plugin added. We need to add the skeen plugin. Skeen plugin. Bevy skeen. Oh, you know what I did wrong, actually? I messed up the name of my own library. I knew it was 0.3. I knew that that was the the right thing to use. Why I let myself get distracted by that, I have no idea. So skeen plugin default. We will get the actual stuff here as soon as it builds. Because I built with the wrong dependency earlier, which is sick. And this introduces a dependency on Bevy, Bevy's BRP crate. I guess it's 0.17.2 out. Should I be updating this already? Yeah, it is. Skeen plugin needs to come in. Come on, Rust Analyzer, you can do it. Rust Analyzer working hard. You can tell by the progress bar. If you see Blender when your streams, you just presume. we did the Blender stuff manually for this demo. Wait, Bevy BRP is like the error that people make when saying ATM machine, no? The error people make when saying ATM machine. Yes. Yes, it is. In the other order. Because nobody knows what BRP is. I could say I was going to the ATM and people would know what I mean. But if I say that I'm using BRP, it's just jargon. So I could just say the Bevy remote protocol. Did I get any further with the game I was building on Skeen in the Saturday streams? Which one was it? At this point, I've worked on a number of games on the Saturday streams. I kind of got distracted building a Skeen demo, and then I got distracted re-implementing a bunch of mechanics from Tunic. And that's kind of where I am right now. Right now, I'm in very much like do a bunch of Rust language stuff for Rust Adventure. Finish the Skeen demo with the stuff that I'm trying to build for it. Rip Ivy, rip Wash Cycle. Yeah. Yeah, I think Ivy's dead for good. I think I learned some useful things from Wash Cycle, but I think Ivy is dead for good. I don't know that 2D isometric is really something that is worth spending like a lot of time on. There were some interesting things in that game. Like Ivy was, effectively like a Hades one perspective game, 2D isometric. But what that meant is that we had to do so much like render all of the animations out of Blender using a Python script. That it just felt easier to do stuff like that in 3D, right? Like if I was using a 3D model to render out sprite sheets that I could use to like render into a 2D isometric world that I then also had to re-implement the depth buffer for so that you could walk through and around things when you were supposed to. Like that feels like re-implementing a 3D pipeline in 2D. And the question becomes like, for what reason? So I think Ivy is dead. Wash Cycle was for the game jam. Also some interesting things. Picking on an invisible grid, stuff like that. I could conceivably see going back to Wash Cycle at some point. It definitely wasn't like particularly fun. Not developing it, but like playing it. Like there was really no like really fun mechanic. What's the name of the camera style that doesn't have a view frustum? So 3D stuff looks 2D? You mean isometric? I guess Tunic is isometric, right? So like this kind of thing? Or are you talking more of the, Monument Valley kind of stuff? Kind of the same thing, right? Orthographic? Yeah, orthographic is definitely... Yeah, orthographic and perspective are the two like predominant like ways to set up a camera with perspectives and stuff. Isometric is kind of a specific camera angle. Yeah. But the one thing that's not... So the other thing is like orthographic and perspective aren't really all that different. The big difference, like if you were going to do something like Tunic, they have depth of field blur in the game. And orthographic cameras still have a frustum. Yeah. What was I gonna say? Tunic still has depth of field, and orthographic cameras don't. So really, you can get the same effect by effectively having like an infinitely far away perspective camera. In which case, you would still be able to access the depth of field blur effects. So they're not like all that different. Okay, so we're in Blender. We're gonna skein it up. You know what I didn't do? Reflect the obstacle. So derive component, reflect. We will reflect component to get that data out. We will rerun so that BRP serves up our endpoint. We'll go over to Blender. I will hopefully let my key combo pull up the fetch type registry. And then this will be, I want to rename this though. Actually, before I insert it into type path equals API. I've taken to doing this quite a bit, actually, for anything that I'm expecting to use externally. Renaming the reflect type path so that when I insert it, it's now API obstacle. And then everything that I look for is API whatever, which also means if I move it around in my code that none of the exported GLTFs break. So this on the mesh, I think the mesh is the right place. And then here, we'll leave it off for a second so that one has it and one doesn't. Let's export. If I can hit the right keyboard keys, we'll pull Blender a little bit closer too. Oh, you know what? It already reloaded and happened. Here's the other one. I'm doing this super zoomed in on a whatever. So we insert, we export, GLTF. Hot reloading. Which is cool, right? Like, it's cool to be able to go into Blender, build something that is like supposedly level like, have it get processed into like 2D meshes and stuff, build a 2D visibility mesh, and then just like have that hot reloading whenever you insert a component. So now if we duplicate this and we like re-export, I need to get on that export key. Let me get another one. So live hot reloading of GLTF assets. Which is really cool. But yeah, so there's a couple of like little bugs here and there. I think I want to make this operate on triangles instead of kind of like the vertex implicit ordering. Because then it makes it easier to do like Blender style stuff. With Scheme, you can have all your components in Blender use a low poly mesh, and Bevy can handle swapping the meshes with high poly. You can have all your components in Blender use a low poly mesh, and Bevy can handle swapping the meshes with high poly. What do you mean? Like, what are you trying to do? Like, the answer to your questions today is all, yeah, you can do that. But like, like, why are you using low poly meshes in Blender and then Bevy's inserting high poly meshes? Like, that sounds weird. But yeah, you can absolutely do that. Like if you put all of the components onto like a mesh or whatever, they all get put onto some entity. Like each of these things are entities in here. And then if you want to swap out the mesh that is on that entity, just swap out the mesh handle. So you can totally do that if you want to. I don't know how you're going to identify the meshes to use. Like you're going to have to code that part yourself. There's no automatic like low poly, high poly swapping for what you're trying to do. But you could definitely do that, right? If you had like, if you had things named in a specific way, for example, where the mesh had like tree and then you had like tree low and tree high, you could look for everything that was named tree low and replace it with tree high in Bevy. Like that would work. Which editor am I using for Rust? I'm using VS Code right now. VS Code is fine. I don't have anything really egregiously nice or egregiously bad to say about it. They keep trying to shove certain features in my face, and I don't like that. It kind of breaks when it tries to update in the background and is like pre-downloaded the JavaScript, but hasn't downloaded everything yet. So, I mean, there are downsides, but it works just fine. Rust Analyzer is the real key there. No matter which editor you're using, you're going to want Rust Analyzer running on your code. And Rust Analyzer is compatible with VS Code and NeoVim and all these other things and Zed, etc. I mean, yeah, you can swap out whatever you want. If you have like high poly assets and you have some way to associate them with the stuff that you're doing in Blender, you can definitely swap stuff out. I think that you're kind of like thinking of problems that you don't have yet, as far as I can tell. But yeah, you can totally do that. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with this demo. I think it's pretty much done on stream though. Like there's not much else to do here. I'm going to make a concrete video on the whole implementation and everything. I'm probably going to fix this little triangle issue first. I don't know if I'm going to do a GPU implementation. I might. Depends. From a few days using Zed, it's extremely light and you loved it. Sweet. Yeah, Zed's great. Like Zed, as long as you have Rust Analyzer, which Zed has, then everything's great and you can use pretty much any editor for Rust. I use VS Code because it's historically I've been an Emacs user. And being an Emacs user means that I do a lot of things with like key combos and key chords and stuff like that. And people can't really tell what you're doing if you're swapping between buffers really quickly. And there's no like display. So I use VS Code to kind of like slow me down a little bit and force me to use the mouse a little bit more on stream. So that when I switch a file, people can be like, oh, he clicked on main.rs. I can follow what he's doing. That's really why I use VS Code on stream. My personal preference is for something more like NeoVim or Emacs. I still use Emacs for writing scripts and stuff. I just use it off stream. Cool. I think that's it for today. 3 hours. We're going to go again tomorrow. So Friday morning stream. Probably Friday morning. I don't know. We'll either do Rust language stuff and swap into some Bevy stuff. I got Bevy Flappy Bird that I need to finish up scripting wise. I've got some Some other stuff that we could do, like the layered materials stuff for Bevy is another thing that we could get into. I haven't, oh, that's not the right thing to run. This is Vertex Colors doing height lerped like materials layering. I've learned a lot about material layering in general and how to implement it. And some of the things that I've seen scare me. Just from the perspective of like, people are like, oh, if you take these, like, for example, if you have a normal map, you can squash that down into 2 components instead of 3 components using a compression algorithm. And then in the shader, reconstruct the Z component, which means that you have just an extra free channel for random data. And boy, do people use that extra channel for random data. On top of that, you can do things like most of the values that we're dealing with in shaders are 0 to 1, right? But you can turn that into like a chunk of 4 sections, like 0 to 25, 25 to 50%, 50% to 75, 75 to 100. And then if you use values over 1, you have an infinite range of those. So you can do a whole bunch of stuff. You use R and a height map for extra data. Well, height map is only 1 channel, right? So you have 3 channels left for data, or 2 channels left for data, depending on how you're doing things. But yeah, I'm doing 2D texture arrays for the other demo. Let's see. I think I have that one up too. Let's go to GitHub, Rust Adventure. Bevy examples, I think, is the one with the layering in it. Oh, right. I was going to do maps today too. Maybe I'll finish that up off stream later. Oh, this is going to fully build. I think that's okay. I updated Rust and Rust Up and everything. This is the demo with the 2D texture arrays, though. So when I move this back into the Scheme demo, the Scheme demo is kind of getting to be like just like a full game with like random implementation of stuff. I don't know how well it'll work as like a demo of Scheme's capabilities, but from my own personal perspective, like, Scheme doesn't need a full game demo. But people have come in asking for one. Like, people want to see like what is the top end of what you can do using Scheme, which is really just what is the top end of what you can do building a 3D Bevy game. So like I feel like if I'm gonna do a Scheme demo, I want to make something that is of a reasonable quality so that people can look at the Scheme demo and go, oh, that's a Bevy game. It looks nice. I can build a Bevy game that looks nice. Because Scheme itself just doesn't have that much functionality. It's like put components on entities, be done. Gotta do that cargo clean that clears 180 gigs of artifacts from time to time. Not if you have a 20 terabyte drive. I don't have a 20 terabyte drive. I want one though. One thing you like is having the hue in the material and just the saturation and luminance in the texture. Interesting. So then you free up the channel for the texture, and then it's like one color for the whole thing. There's a way to share crates between projects, I think. Is that a question or a statement? Are you asking if there's a way to share like a Rust crate between 2 projects? Because that's just crates.io, right? Like we were talking earlier about Bevy Mod Outline. Bevy Mod Outline is just a Bevy plugin distributed as a crate that you can install and use and get outlines. So is basically every other crate that you'll ever use. Yes, only 2 channels in the image. The other 2 can be used for other things, but there's also much easier to animate stuff like summer to autumn color changes. A single crate directory instead of... Why are you having crates duplicated for every project? That's the part that I don't understand, I think. Because, like, a cargo toml can install a crate from the local file system. It can install a crate from GitHub. It can install a crate from crates.io. You could also have a workspace where they all share kind of like interdependencies and stuff. I don't know why you would have crates duplicated for every project. This is the 2D texture array height lerped material layers demo, which I need to commit and talk about sometime. Yeah, I mean, you can make a workspace, but like... Do you mean the target directory? You can have one cargo target directory. It starts to have some issues if you do like different flag configurations for different crates and stuff. But you could have one build directory. But yeah, I think this looks nice, right? And this is just like a half-assed demo, if I'm being honest. It's like the 2D texture arrays. We've got 2 textures on either side. The grout in the tiles has a height map, and we're taking the grass and we're flowing that into the tiles. I also want to do a little bit of noise because the harsh line is a little bit too harsh for me. I want to do some kind of either height map based noise related transition there or something else like that. And then I think that this effect is basically done and we can go use it. It's really funny because like I built this whole thing to do like completely replicate the standard material. So all of the lighting and stuff inside of Bevy. And the reason that I started doing this is for Tunic. And like, open image, new tab. And like Tunic does have some of this effect, but it's way less. It's way less intense, I think. It's more like just changing the base color rather than doing the full standard material layering. But it was a fun project, so this is basically what I'm going to use it for. We've already got the bushes done. We do need a player character controller. I've done the material layering work. And then we just place a bunch of stuff in Blender. I probably also want to do some HDR-y kind of stuff. There's some Tunic effects that I think are really cool. Where's one of them? It would be cool to implement like some basic turrets like this. This is just like one shot, so with a trail. We could use Hanabi for that. I don't know that I really want to per se, but we could use Hanabi for the particles and make it look nicer. Tunic. These These effects are basically other things that we can do. So like going up to maybe a secret door and running an animation player for like this door, for example. This door kind of has like a, you have to do a certain key combination to get into it, and then it moves out or like sinks in and then splits and then goes back. These little light towers on either side kind of light up in specific ways too, and they're related to like building the UV maps correctly. So there's a bunch of stuff that can like show off different Blender effects for like controlling how the UV maps go, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a really good choice of demo for Skeen. But also then like you end up with all of this extra code for example, if I like write this shader, this is just a Fresnel shader basically, right? With a blue tint. But then the Fresnel shader with the blue tint lives in the project and like, So I don't know. We'll see. But that's it for stream for today. I'll be back tomorrow. Same time, same bad hour. For those that were. Have a great rest of your day, y'all.